Warsaw. I was born in Warsaw, which is the capital of Poland. Happy family, looked like a very good life. Then one day everything changed, the World War II broke out. I didn't understand it at the time, I was too little, but I do remember the day. I remember the day because it was different. You know, the boom booms going on, the bombing, the shells, the apartment full of people. There was a general mobilization, all men had to go to the army, to the military. So my father was packing, he was a physician, he had to go to report to a military hospital in another town. My grandfather and my uncles came from a different town, also they were going together to report there. I remember my uncle Adam coming in uniform. I was just so excited, I thought it was wonderful. I just laughed and laughed, I was very happy about it. That was 1939. September the 1st, long before the war came to the United States with Pearl Harbor. So, I remember women putting the paper tapes across the windows, supposedly so the glass wouldn't break or fall out. That was the beginning. Everybody was very excited, particularly that in a day or two, France and England also declared the war on Germany in solidarity. So we said, okay, you know, we're not alone, it will just be fine. But what happened? Nothing happened. The front was right in Warsaw, right on the outskirts. And I remember that because I remember the smoke, the fire, the seat of the government, which was a royal castle in smoke, burned to the ground with bomb. It was very dramatic. So even a kid understands it, and I remember it. My uncle that came so excited in the uniform was dead in 3 weeks from a shell. You know, there at fortification, he was only 27 years old. Well, 2 days later, the country capitulated. That was all. It was still September, the same month. The government got into their chauffeur limousines, went south through the border, left the country. And here we were. So what do you do? War, of course, it's difficult, but we have to live somehow. This part of Poland became under occupation. The other part was just taken as a part of Germany. And the governor started very fast, in a few days, it became clear that we're not all in it together. There were different rules and regulations for Jews. And at the time, Warsaw was a large city, the biggest, of course, in Poland. There was almost not quite 1.25 million of residents. And out of that, 1/3 were Jews. In Poland was a big Jewish minority, the greatest in Europe, for centuries. With big cultural life, very important in industry, as merchants, as stores, and so. And there was real cultural life, you know, theaters, newspapers, restaurants, what have you. Well, right in this very first month in October, the first regulations came for Jews only. All adults had to wear, over 12 years old, had to wear armbands, white armbands with blue Star of David. I didn't have to, I was too young. Jews could not ride trains. We had special streetcars, trolleys, 3 lines, then 2 lines, then it was just 1 line. It had no number on it, you didn't know where it went, it had the Star of David on it. The Jewish schools were closed, synagogues were closed. Every week, every 2 weeks, every few days, there was something different. Jews were not allowed to have a jewelry. They had to give it over to the occupant. And for everything was a death penalty. Everything was a capital crime. The property, the businesses, Jewish businesses, whichever they were marked as Jewish businesses. And that was not allowed to Gentiles to patronize these businesses, and on both sides that was being punished. So be it a store, corner grocery shop, or a bar, or a lawyer, or a doctor, or a nurse, you were not supposed to cross these lines. And it wasn't considered actually religious, it was considered race, Jewish race, Semitic race. Because many people weren't particularly religious, and sometimes they were even baptized and changed their religion, but they were considered still Jews. Well, one tries to somehow survive and hope that it's going to be over. What could you do? It was, of course, more difficult. Food and clothes was for everybody rationed, as it usually happens during the war. But rations for Jews were half of the rations for the Gentiles. So it was practically impossible to just live off that. And then the good thing happened, my father came back. Well, we were of course very happy. He couldn't work in a hospital before. He used to work in the hospital, and he also had a private practice at home. That's how it used to be. You had a practice at home, you could call your doctor, he would answer the phone. And he also wrote for medical journals. He published actually translation of a book from German about diseases of heart. He was a cardiologist. And he came back. He was only allowed to work then for a Jewish clinic. We were all working under Jewish Council, which also Germans set up, funded, with a chairman, Mr. Cherniakov. He was in a horrible situation because he was supposed to be a go-between. If anything we wanted, the people wanted, you had to go through him, and he was supposed to negotiate with the Germans and the other way around. So for a while it seemed that we were just somehow living this way. We also lived with my father's father, who was a widower. He was a dentist. He was an old man, but he still practiced. I remember him very well. He was a sweet old gentleman. And he lived with us. And myself and my older brother, 5 years older. Well, at the time, my mother's friend, lady friend, a Gentile, offered my mom that she would take her jewelry for a safekeeping, and my mom very thankfully, gratefully accepted and gave it over to her. And the rest that she had, she hid in a heater. It was this big tile contraption with big iron door, double door, that you in winter would start fire, but it was no winter, so my mom made a little bundle and stashed it, and that was a stash that her father gave her as he was leaving for this, to register, whatever it was, for the military. He was a wealthy man, and actually the apartment was a gift from him, for a wedding gift to my mom. Well, then one day, there is a knock on the door and there is a ring that the finger doesn't let go. SS came, which was there were special units of German military. They came and they arrested my father. We didn't know why, we didn't know what was happening, they just took him. Mr. Chernyakov, the chairman, went the next day to the Gestapo, tried to talk and asked, and asked again. I saw it actually in his diary, which are now published. This man, he wrote every day what was happening, but nothing helped. We didn't know what happened. My father was in jail in Warsaw. Month later, they came again. This time, they gave my mom 15 minutes to leave the apartment. And the officer was walking around and looking what she was packing. She had 2 little kids, an old father-in-law, 7-room big apartment full of, stuff. And she managed to get to this clunky heater thing and open it and grab this, what it was, were actually what she got from her father. There was a stash of gold coins, $20 coins. That's why I'm talking to you here, and that's why I survived. I have a great respect for that, for $20 American coins. Well, and then, a few months later, they started building a wall. And everybody had to move to another part. Jews had to move to a certain part of town, and Gentiles had to move out of there. You wouldn't believe the pandemonium and people with carts and wheelbarrows and carrying stuff, everything, people getting out of their apartments and moving into the Jewish apartments and the other way around. Everybody. Oh, I've missed still when we were evicted and Mom found some other little apartment. She had to go back to this German woman, it was given to a German family, to buy back my little bed, and like necessary things. And we had really nothing. My grandfather fell into depression, he wanted to die and all that. Meantime, my father got transported to Auschwitz. We didn't understand even what Auschwitz meant back then. Nobody heard of that. That was first transport to the camp. And then, so we were in this apartment. But from there, we had to move then again to this next apartment in a special, where everybody was moving. We moved at this point to this little place, so we shared a small apartment with another family. Also a doctor, his wife and 2 kids, our age. And it was a small, poor place, and was tremendously, crowded, the whole place. And then little by little they closed the wall, and here we were. And there was really, it's hard to say, even to describe, because here, year before, everybody had a normal life, worked hard, looked to a good life, and all of a sudden we had no rights whatsoever. The only thing they would come to collect more money or else, and everybody was so squeezed, and they would go and give everything, but the money really wasn't buying anything because it was such a lack of food. And more people were brought to this small area, walled-in area from suburbs, fairs. There were more than 400 ghettos in Poland, in different cities and towns. But from villages that sometimes there were only a few Jewish families, well, they brought everybody. These people came with basically nothing, you know, just like a bundle somewhere. They had no way to support themselves, to work. There was no place to work. People, like, let's say, if you were a lawyer, you were cut off of your clients. If you had clients that were Gentiles, they wouldn't come there, and you couldn't go. So it was just a desperate, desperate situation. I remember these crowds on the street. We had no light. So at night, in winter, when it starts being dark very early, we were using these fluorescent, like brooches, you know, green kind of things that you would know in the darkness that there was a person there. And I still think that it was kind of funny. I was looking for little clearings between people's legs and thought, and you know, you get used to everything. And people were selling everything. They were standing by the buildings and selling stuff from the kitchens, from the house, anything, silver, china, lining from the coat, shoes from their feet, you know, little by little, I mean, everything. People were just so thin, they were little kids, you were sick and there were no medication, you couldn't buy medication, and there were more doctors there per capita than in any sample of people that you could imagine. But there was just no medication and no food. So people were just dying of cold and hunger, basically. And I remember I was coming here, we were just chatting with Shelley, and I said, I never can forget it totally, because I always have it like running on the back of, you know, of my head, of my eye. I see it in front of my eyes, particularly little kids sitting there, barefoot sometimes in the snow, crying, 2, 3 sometimes together. I don't know whether they were siblings. Parents probably were dead already or gone somewhere, who knows, transported already. It was just something like it was truly difficult to imagine that can happen. You know, it just seems impossible. Nobody could expect something like that to happen. And they were taking people, meaning they requested quotas of people to come and be transported, supposedly for labor, to work in camps and villages. People were unwilling, but then 5,000, 10,000 people, and meantime the new people were coming. There were even coming people from other countries, stashed there together. They had nothing. And so when they started promising, for example, that they would give like a big loaf of bread and a jar of marmalade, people would volunteer actually and go. And go to this transport. That was a train leaving, it goes normally through the city. We actually could see that was the square. We would go to the fence and look. I remember it well because I remember when my grandfather was taking the dentist. He was an old man, so he was taking the old people, and he just with a little suitcase went, you know, and they took them to Treblinka. We didn't even know and understand. These people were just killed on arrival. And new people were coming. Then there were more and more people. And at this point, you had to work. If you didn't work, then you had to be transported and taken. So my mom found a job sewing German uniforms, army uniforms. You had to have your own sewing machine, which you can imagine cost a fortune because that was like a price of life. And she was a privileged lady who never worked, but she said there is a hard work because it's a difficult, you know, fabric, and so And she was sitting, and there were these workshops, they were sewing uniforms. Some women would bring kids and try to hide them in piles of fabric or these piles of parts of uniforms, and the soldiers would come and check with bayonets whether the kids are not there. So that was not possible. And at this point, when they started more, and then still my step-grandmother came before they closed the ghetto. She was still also with us. She tried to go through what we call the green border, meaning illegally through the border to the Soviet Union, and to escape. And the guides robbed her, and she got like hysterical. She couldn't take it. They robbed her, and she came back and she joined us, and she was also with us. She was still a young woman. And so she was also with us. She also went there out to Treblinka, just like my grandfather. And at this, they also meantime came the news from the commandant of Auschwitz that my father is dead. And they asked my mom to come and collect his ashes. She was afraid to go, so she didn't go, and she never heard from them anymore. And at this point, I got out of there, but I don't think that we have time, because I think too much into too much detail. But I managed to escape from there. And you know, you could talk about it for a long time, and just said my goodbyes to my mom. I was sort of taught how to do it, and through a building, a court building, which had gates on both sides, on the Gentile side and the Jewish side. My mom brought me there, let my hand off, and I walked through the whole building alone, and on the other side was my nanny, which was a living nanny. She used to live in our apartment and take care of me, and she came and she picked me up and took me there, and I didn't have particularly Semitic features, so the police and the soldiers didn't stop me. And that's how I got out of it. How old I was 7 years old. I spent in ghetto exactly 2 years, November 40 to November 42. And then, well, I went with her. She was sharing a room with some maid, her friend, because, you know, she was living, so she lost her work, and she lost her place of living. My mom paid her, of course. The lady that my mom gave her jewelry to keep stole it, and then sent blackmailing her for a duration. Then my mother got me the aid, and I got false documents. They weren't false, they were real, but they were of some dead child talking about, you know, identity theft. Well, I was that. My name was Mary. I had to learn all these things, parents' name and whatever, and I lived and talked. I was Mary. Actually, even after the war, if somebody called on a street Marina, I would turn around. I was so used to it. By the time the war ended, I was 10 years old, and the first time I went to school, I was so confused, like who I am, what my name was, that I remember the teachers thought that I was actually a German hiding, and they were suspicious about it, because I was clearly somehow thinking, you know, before I said my date of birth. And, but that's, you know, would be another story. I just wanted to tell you what can happen unthinkable, which seems impossible. Nobody would have believed that something like that can happen, particularly what we always considered, you know, of a civilized cultural people. So My family, well, my father was killed in Auschwitz, my grandfather was killed in Treblinka, my father was shot right there. My mom with my brother managed to survive thanks to the money they paid, and they were allowed to go work. They pretended not to see them just as ghetto was being liquidated. Some woman with a little kid that walked behind her and thought that my mother just hid and that they didn't notice her, tried to also scooch down in the same ruins. She didn't know that that was already, agreed upon, and they shot her and the kid right in the spot. But they walked out, they were blackmailed, he had different papers. My brother, his name is George, but he was known as a Victor, but he looked much more Semitic, so he had to be, my mom paid for it. He was kept somewhere in a room. He couldn't, for 2 years, get out on the street. He, of course, we didn't go to school, but he couldn't even walk on the street, so nobody would, he was just sitting there in the room. And my mom was working as a nanny, working as a cleaning lady, working as whatever she could. And she was supposed to be my aunt. I was just with my nanny. I was supposed to call her mom, but I never was able to somehow do it. I remember once when there was another boy, also a Jewish boy, with his mom, Stefanek, I remember him. And once somebody heard that he was calling his mother mom, and she was supposed to be an aunt. So the Germans came and shot both of them. And Zosha, my nanny, took me there the same day and showed me the place where they were buried in the forest. And showed me to say, that's what happens, you see, because you have to call